We're back with another edition of the Federalist Radio Hour. I'm Emily Jashinsky, culture editor here at The Federalist. As always, you can email the show at radio@thefederalist.com. Follow us on X at FDRLST. Make sure to subscribe wherever you download your podcasts, and of course to the premium version of our website as well. I'm very excited about today's guest. We are joined by Luke Moon, who is the executive director over at the Philos Project. Luke, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So I actually asked Luke to come on the show after watching this fascinating kind of a rebuttal video on the Philos Project's YouTube page to the interview that Tucker Carlson did with Munther Isaac, who, Luke, I'm just going to guess, and I'm guessing you were familiar with him before Tucker had him on the show.
Oh, yeah. He's like, a friend of me.
I was going to say, because we were just talking about how you've had extensive experience in this, obviously in the space. You work for Philos, which is dedicated to the space, but you have a long history of, actually you've been to Bethlehem, you've been to Palestinian territory, you've obviously been to Israel many times. But Tucker did an interview that was framed as not an investigation, but a conversation about Israel's treatment of Christians. And I really liked the way that you approached this subject, Luke, because you said, listen, I've watched Tucker with my wife. I loved his show on Fox. This interview was wrong for reasons X, Y, and Z. And I think that's important because I don't begrudge Tucker for having this curiosity about the fate of Christians in the Middle East, about the fate of Christians in Bethlehem, frankly. But I thought you brought some really helpful nuance to the discussion. So could you tell us just a little bit about your reaction? Because your video is 2 hours long, and I commend it to everyone. It's fantastic. But just if you had to answer the question, basically, that Tucker posed to Munther Isaac, which was, how does Israel treat Christians? How would you respond?
Right. Well, Israel treats Christians actually pretty well. I mean, they don't really care that much. I mean, there's just not that many of them. They don't matter. I mean, you could ask, well, how does America treat the Baha'i? Right? Like, you'd probably get a similar response, right? Because, like, the Baha'i, they have so much influence on America, right? Okay, maybe, but not really. I mean, it's like there just aren't that many Christians in Israel. There's it's obviously mostly Jews, and then there's 20% of Israel's Arab, but most of those Arabs are Muslim, and so the Christians just don't matter in any kind of. There's just not enough of them to really matter.
And how many would you estimate Christians are in Israel?
50,000, 60,000.
Right, and in Bethlehem, it's about what? Oh,
it's so small. Bethlehem, you're talking. I mean, the real estimate is 11,000. I doubt it's even that. I would cut that in half, maybe even further. Mm-hmm. It's basically after COVID, the Christians left. It's just not. There's discrimination. There is hard to get a job. If it's very clannish. Like the Arab culture is very clannish. And so if your cousin's not part of the thing, and your cousin gets you the job, that's how life happens. So if you're not part of one of those big families, you're going to have a hard time.
And actually, that's really interesting because one of the things that Munther Isaac claims, I don't even remember if he got to this in the Tucker interview, is that Christians have fled Bethlehem.
They have.
Because of Israel. Because Bethlehem is sort of, and you can explain this better than I can, contested area in the West Bank where Israel does some sort of military operations, anti-terrorism military operations, but that's his sort of contention.
Right. And we had heard that for years. Mm-hmm. So several years ago, actually, this is in 2020, I think it came out, the survey actually came out in 21. But we wanted to get at this, like what is motivating Christians to leave? And so we actually did surveys, because what you would find is that I would take, you'd go in a public venue, mm-hmm. and a Christian will, if you ask a Christian, hey, how are you treated by the Muslims? How's it going on? And they're like, oh, we're just the best of friends. We're just having guys, it's amazing. I mean, we skip through the fields together. Really, it's like when we walk down the street, rainbows follow us. I mean, that's the picture that they give you. But then you get them alone, especially if you get a beer in them. man, they will they're like, wow, it's just terrible. It's actually quite terrible. It's really hard. It's really hard. And so we wanted to get at that. And so we put a survey together. We hired the premier surveyor of Palestinian life. And the survey came back. This is the primary reason people are leaving is economic. And the secondary reason is education. And mind you, both of those are related to the conflict and the challenges facing the Palestinians, particularly in the Palestinian territories. But it wasn't the primary driver. It was just life was hard. And it's like, why do I got to stick around? It's just not worth it. It's not worth the hassle. It's not worth the discrimination, the people who are against us. It's not great. And, my cousin, he lives in Miami. Miami's great, right? I can go to the beach in Miami. I can't go to the beach in Bethlehem, right? And so they go. There's a lot of Palestinian Christians, a lot of Palestinians just leaving. Because life's hard. And that's what people do when life's hard. And unless you have, and the thing is, here's a distinction, I think, between Christians and Muslims and Jews, is that Muslims and Jews are landed people, meaning like they're very committed to the land matters in a very deep way, differently than it matters to Christians. We're like, the earth is the Lord's and everywhere in it. And so it's like, we're not that connected. But Muslims, they pray in a direction. Right?
Or the temple, for example.
They do. Well, the Muslims don't pray towards the temple.
I meant the Jews, right.
But the Jews do.
Right. And that ground is important.
Exactly. And then the Jewish prayer, the Orthodox are praying 3 times a day. They're praying specifically, they name Jerusalem in their prayers. Every time they pray, they name Jerusalem. And so that matters, obviously, if your whole orientation of your faith is towards a land. And Christians, we're not like, maybe there are Christians out there praying towards Rome or something, or I guess the Baptists, maybe they pray to Nashville. But I'm kidding, Baptists, I'm kidding.
That's pretty good.
But other than that, I don't know. The Christians were just not a landed people. We really aren't. And so, it's one of the reasons all across the region, the Christians are just leaving. In 1950 in Iraq, there was about 5 million Christians. Today, there's 125,000. And that was part of Tucker's critique. It's like, it's because of America, because of our war and all that sort of stuff. Well, kinda, but it was also because just Islam's not nice to Christians. Yeah. All right. So there's that.
Yeah.
Right. But it also matters that you're the Christians the land is not that important.
That's interesting because it gets at this fundamental, I think, argument coming from Tucker, which is that the United States has been disproportionately disinterested in the fate of Christians throughout the Middle East. That sort of U.S. imperialism or U.S. adventurism, maybe I'll put it that way, actually kind of sacrifices Christians, Christian life, Christian culture in the Middle East, ancient Christian culture. There was a beautiful church that was hit early in the post-October 7th conflict. Just a very old, I think it was more than 1,000. It was more than 1,000. Yeah. Papyrus? Is that it?
Yeah. No, it wasn't hit. The building next to it was hit. The building fell on it. Okay. So it was, but
no, that's an important distinction.
It is. Yeah. It wasn't targeted. It was unfortunate. But it was the building next to it was being used to launch rockets out of.
And Tucker's sort of a stand-in here for, because I think, again, I don't begrudge him for asking some of these questions, is a stand-in for a proxy for a larger kind of curiosity or backlash that's mounting on the right. And the argument is that, again, Islam, not friendly to Christians, but Israel and the United States should also be more concerned about Christians than it has shown. That's probably a charitable description of the argument. But how do you address that?
I would love that. I would love that. I swear, if Christians care, heck, if I could get Christians, not even Americans, if I could get Christians to care about Christians.
Right.
I mean,
because you've been doing this is
oh my
this is your
gosh.
life's work essentially.
I have been doing this so long. I can raise more money in like 2 days than I've probably raised in 15 years for Christian persecution. For something else. Like it just, I have not been able to find the secret sauce to get Christians to care about other Christians. I mean, I went to a conference, it was a Christian justice conference back in 2016 or some long time ago. And afterwards, I think Hillsong played, and they were raising money to help refugees who were fleeing ISIS, basically. And they were going to help a refugee camp. Well, here's the problem. There are no Christian refugee camps anywhere in the world. There were there's Sunni Muslim camps, and there is Shia Muslim camps, and there's Yazidi camps, but there are no Christian camps. I mean, it's not just America. America doesn't care about Christians anywhere. I mean, over the weekend, on Saturday, 11 Nigerians were butchered in their church, and it was set on fire.
Yes.
Yeah, I can't get Christians to care about that.
Australia. Just
Oh my gosh! Yeah, yesterday, Australia.
Can you tell us a little bit about what happened?
Yeah, there was the Archbishop. He's got a great name of Marmari.
It is good.
It's a good name. Anyways, he was he had gone to Gaza, and he had visited the Christians in Gaza and was coming back to Australia to tell. The dude was no Zionist. He's and this guy comes up and as he's preaching, it stabs him in the head, in the neck, and obviously the people grab the attacker, and the bishop was actually praying for him as the bishop himself was bleeding, waiting for the ambulance to get there. But that's just yesterday. I mean, this stuff is happening all the time, all over the world, and I can't get Christians to care. I'm under no illusion that America is going to care about Christians. We never have. I can't think of a single instance where we have cared. I mean, we had a special visa during the Balkan War for Muslims fleeing who needed a place to go because of they were in danger in one of those countries, former Yugoslavia. And we opened up the door for, I think, Bosnian Muslims, a special category. We had a special visa for them.
Right.
During ISIS, we tried to get a special visa for Christians who were fleeing ISIS, who were being targeted, gun to the head, convert or die, that kind of thing. And I mean, I met a woman, her and her husband took 2 separate cars with one of them each took a kid in hopes that they would maybe get together at the very end as they were fleeing ISIS. And the husband and the kid that was with the husband, they didn't make it. That's and the United States didn't care. They didn't care at all. So Tucker, I would love it. If you want to lend your voice, if anybody else wants to lend their voice to help me make the case for Christian persecution around the world, I'm all game. I mean, there's a verse in the New Testament where St. Paul says, do good to all men, but first the household of faith. And I mean, I've used that verse all. I got in an argument with a former pastor of mine one time, and he's like, well, we just can't let Christianity become tribal. The Jews are standing for the Jews and the Muslims are standing for the Muslims. But Christians, we just can't stand just for Christians, because then we're just like them and we're not ecumenical or whatever.
Right. There's no Greek or Jew. Right.
Right. And no, Paul says first,
not mutually exclusive. Right.
Of course. You got to start somewhere. How about, we're welcoming all these people into the faith. Hey, come become a brother and sister in Christ. And then, but hey, if you do, just know that, we're not going to help you if you get in trouble, though. Sorry about that. We're brothers and sisters, but we're going to leave you behind.
There's so much to go off of there. It's so fascinating.
Sorry.
And actually, one of the places that I want to talk about, I was thinking in the context of this current debate about immigration, and I'm so glad you brought this up, the footage of Chinese migrants coming across the border right now, some of whom are saying, I don't know if their asylum claims are accurate, but some of them are saying they're Christians that are fleeing persecution from China. And what we're doing is just encouraging everyone to kind of come in and get lost in this asylum system instead of saying, here's a special route for persecuted Christians or even persecuted Muslims, which we're not doing. But that, I guess, calls to mind what you were talking about with the Yazidis.
Yeah.
And there are probably other Christian populations throughout the recent wars in the Middle East that have been decimated, like the Yazidis that I don't even know about, even as a journalist that I don't even know about, and a Christian journalist that I don't even know about. Can you give us some background on what happened over the course of the last couple of decades to Christian populations like the Yazidis in the Middle East?
Well, Yazidis are not Christian, but they're like a bad Muslim. They have some.
So explain that.
Yeah, they're like so.
It's kind of like an offshoot.
Yeah, it's an offshoot. Man, you put me on the spot here, Emily. It's been a long time since I looked at what they.
But just the basic,
basically they're seen by other Muslims as being apostate, meaning that like they created some, they have their own special prophet. Yeah, the Prophet Muhammad's their guy, but they got this other guy too, right? It's kind of one of those types of things. It's a bit like the Alawites have a similar. That's the Assad family. They're part of that. Like it's some of these kind of they're kind of weird Muslims, right? They have their own special belief, and as a result, they had a special mountain in Iraq that they were in a particular area in northern Iraq, and when ISIS came, they targeted them. They targeted the Christians, and they carried off thousands of Yazidi girls to be Muslim slaves in the rest of the region. And a lot of them have never been seen again. But the United States actually recognized what happened to the Yazidis as a genocide. But when we asked them to recognize Christians, the attacks, the decimation of the Christian communities, the State Department was like, no, we're not going to do that.
So what happened?
We actually sued them. We were part of a coalition of organizations that sued the State Department to recognize the Christians as being victims of genocide under ISIS. Because it was like, no, well, the Christians, they don't count, right? It's like there really is a animus towards Christianity in most institutions, it seems, the government institutions. And they just don't have any power anywhere. But, I know that the challenge is that there isn't, I'd be all for, having some special designations and having, a special way for Christians to come in. But the other problem is that, when Trump came into office in 2017, one of the first things he did was he issued that executive order saying that we're going to limit immigration from these Muslim countries in particular that were basically failed states and unable to help us evaluate who was coming in.
Right.
And he said in that executive order, with the exception of religious minorities, okay? And there was a bunch of Christian organizations that took a swipe at that. Like they had to get their dig into Trump, right? Sure. And so they took a full page ad in the Washington Post saying, it's terrible. This is, we're called as Christians to love our neighbor, and this is a terrible thing. And I'm like, Trump literally singled out Christians as being able to be an exception here. How about we focus on helping Christians come? And they're like, no, we can't do that. We can't do that. And it to this day, I have it just killed my tolerance for most of the people involved in the refugee resettlement case on the Christian side, because I just watched over and over again how they just had no regard for what was happening to Christians in the region. And it's not gotten any better. And the problem is, you do have This is happening just recently in Gaza. People were saying there was a bunch of reports early on within the first month and a half or so, where people were saying that they had seen visitations of Jesus and they were getting dreams, and there was, hundreds of Gazans were coming to faith. And I asked the Palestinian pastor about that. I said, we hear that, all these Gazans are coming to faith. And he goes, yeah, I don't believe that. They're just trying to get out. They're just trying. They know that they can say Christian, and we got, we saw a dream of Jesus, and they get fast tracked to America or something like that. He said,
does that happen?
I'm assuming, because this Palestinian pastor probably knows better than me. I mean, I do believe that people do see visions of Jesus and they get saved.
Oh, of course, but that they would get relocated through nonprofits or something.
It would probably help out their cause a bit if someone vouched for them, and
some nonprofit would help pay for the legal.
Yeah, exactly,
okay,
or whatever.
Interesting.
And this pastor was like, the people he knows who became real followers of Jesus, their big concern, they don't want to leave. They want to stay and evangelize. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, oh, okay, that's a big difference, right? So it's hard over there to evangelize.
How do you? So this is such a basic and maybe seemingly silly question, but how do you sort fact from fiction on this issue? Because you live in the States, you've been there many, many times, but for the layman, even in media, it's very, very hard, especially within, 24-hour periods, to understand exactly what happened in various situations, because there's so much propaganda and disinformation, willfully and unwillfully. How do you just personally follow this and feel confident in the facts?
Yeah, well, at this point, because I've been in it so long, that I kind of just, kind of know. Right?
And people.
I know people, but early on, my rule was I don't believe any of y'all. I just distrust. It's a high bar of distrust. You really have to convince me. I remember one time a friend sent me a picture of there was a group of Christians coming out of St. George's Church, I think somewhere in, I don't know, maybe it was Ramallah or Jerusalem or East Jerusalem somewhere. And there was rocks being thrown at them. And somebody sent me the YouTube saying, hey, the Christians are under attack, by the Muslims, and that a Christian was stabbed. And so I started reaching out to my friends on the ground saying, what happened? And the story of what happened was it was a Christian who was stabbed. No, it was a Muslim who was stabbed. No, it was and he was stabbed and died. And then the other one was, no, he's stabbed and he's in the hospital. And it's or they weren't stabbed. And there was so many, there was no less than 5 or 6 different stories about what happened. And there was literally a video of the people hiding from the rocks. What I found out the story is that there was a group of 18-year-old dudes sitting on a railing, Muslim dudes, and the Christian girls walked by, and they got catcalled. The Christian dudes picked a fight with the Muslim dudes, and one of them got stabbed. So it was totally it was Christian, but it was really just a bunch of 18-year-old dudes picking a fight over girls. Oh. Right? That's the actual story. Right?
That is such an interesting example.
Right? It literally made it to my inbox.
Right.
And I was ready to go. Emily, I was ready to throw down.
Throw rocks.
Given chance, I could make one,
Yeah.
And it turned out, it's just a bunch of dudes. Just dudes being dudes.
That is a really good example, though, because I'm sure similar things like that happen frequently as you follow.
Sure, all the time.
Yeah.
All the time.
Yeah.
So I was in one of those Friday afternoon skirmishes, if you will, on Friday in Bethlehem. I was in actually at the same one of those conferences where I was hanging out with Munther Isaac, who was interviewed by Tucker. And I was at this hotel that was right by the wall where refugee kids would come out on Friday afternoon after the mosque let out. They would have the keffiyehs wrapped around their faces and their slingshots in hand, and they would just start knocking the door of the IDF guys. Mm-hmm. And pretty soon that door would open, and out come the IDF guys, and this, next thing, tear gas and flashbangs and all that sort of stuff. And after about 2 hours, everybody's like, all right, see you next week. I mean, literally, that's exactly how it felt.
Right.
It was an international incident, but it was basically, what you gonna do on Friday? Oh, I'm gonna go, throw rocks at the Jews or throw smoke bombs at the Palestinians. I mean, like that's and that like happened every Friday. It was like a normal, it almost felt like people letting off steam. Problem is, like, that escalates, and if there's external media, then the pictures, and then it starts, it can get a little out of control. But it seemed very much, the times I was in it, it seemed like everybody's just kind of knows what they're doing.
The mundane kind of rhythm of that area.
Yeah, and almost really, I'm telling you, like you're talking to 18-year-old boys on both sides.
Right.
Like, nobody's dying. They're just kind of messing around.
You've been an 18-year-old boy.
I have been an 18-year-old boy. Sometimes I'm a 13-year-old boy in my head, but it's the 18-year-old boy is like, yeah, I'd be on either side. I'd be there.
So back to Munther Isaac. Yeah. You just mentioned that you've known him, and one of the kind of dunks on Tucker that frankly was fair after he posted that long interview with Munther Isaac is that a lot of people knew Munther Isaac because he gave that speech around Christmas that went viral about Jesus in the rubble of Bethlehem. But going back right after October 7th, he referred to the siege, the Israeli siege. He said we condemn murder and everything, but basically typical leftist argument. His church is, so I grew up Missouri Synod Lutheran. He's affiliated kind of with ELCA in the American side, the Evangelical Lutheran Church of America, but is clearly, and you're going to be able to explain this better, but he's clearly from a progressive branch of the church. You're sort of, because I have familiarity with him is that he led for the ordination of women. Yeah. Tell us, just fill in the many dots that I've just left.
Right. I love the international infrastructure of the Lutheran Church. Let me tell you about it anyway. Yes, he is. Here's the thing: is that he actually has become more progressive over the years that I've known him.
Okay,
like he became a serious believer, actually as an adult, and got more into it. And he would, I think the progressivism, I think, got pushed on him. And by progressivism, I mean the kind of language of the wokeism, like the woke language, things like, the settler colonialist, the appeal to the indigeneity, like the siege, like the language of the left. He started using that a lot more. And I would say in the last 4 or 5 years, he's to me indistinguishable from a progressive professor at any kind of liberal Christian institution. It's just like, the last Christ at the Checkpoint that I attended, there was only about 70 people there. I was not well received, and there was a session was like the Book of Ruth, a story of sexual exploitation.
Of course,
yes, this is perfect, exactly what which is like you would find that anywhere at a progressive seminary or something like that. So he's not always been that way. He's become more and more that direction. He is. There's only I don't think there's very many people actually go to his church, and his baby Jesus in the rubble thing got a lot of traction all over the media. Huge story. And to me, the issue with that was it's very much, for all the crying of cultural appropriation, it was serious cultural appropriation to take baby Jesus, the Jew, and put him in a rubble and wrap him in keffiyeh, right? And like make no reference to the fact that you are in Bethlehem, the city of David, the Jewish city of David, yes. where Mother Mary and Joseph went, to register, right? Like that is, it's so weird to me that was like, oh, okay, it's totally acceptable for us to culturally appropriate Jesus for this moment and put him in rubble. Now, does Jesus stand with those who are suffering unjustly in Gaza? 100%, right? But Jesus was Jewish, and if part of your actions are to kill the people which Jesus was part of, I get some issues there, right? It just is like there's a injustice is getting what you're due, right? And it comes around,
And that really brings us to one of the central questions of why or why Munther Isaac now blames Israel for the fleeing of the Christians, for the quote-unquote siege in Bethlehem and all of that. Because we were talking before we started recording fundamentally about what both sides want, what the intended outcome is. And Iran, over the weekend, obviously launched an attack on Israeli soil, not from a proxy, not through the Houthis or Hezbollah, but from Iran itself, unprecedented in that respect. So that kind of brings into focus what the intended end goal is here, because, Iran really truly wants to destroy Israel.
Yes.
So why then? Is it that Munther Isaac sees this through maybe a micro perspective instead of a macro perspective? What explains someone who would be killed by Iranians or persecuted by Iranians should they, have their fantasy of their own imperialism, destroying Israel, wiping it off the face of the earth? What's his deal?
Well, I think so. He has the challenge for the Palestinian who is still sticking around in Bethlehem is like it really does them no favors to support Jews or Israel. Like it's like no one's like Israel doesn't care. The Christians around the world, they don't care. But you know who really cares? The Muslims.
Right.
right. Like you could die for what? Like it's not worth it. Right. And so if that's your starting point, like it doesn't do me any favors to come out in support of Israel or Jews or Christians, or Jews, then you're not going to do it. And then like it just becomes kind of normal, like you're normal, everybody around you, and it's to protect, your flock is to say the things that keep them safe, and the things that keep them safe is Israel sucks. Right? And so you just start saying that all the time. And over time it begins to like it becomes normal and normative for you to speak in favor of the Muslims who rule your life. I mean, I was with a Catholic priest one time in Jordan, and it was we interviewed. I had this group, and we were interviewing a Catholic priest and a Muslim cleric together, right? And the Catholic priest would not name the Temple Mount the Temple Mount. He called it Haram al-Sharif, which is what the Muslims call it. And I said, why don't you call the Temple Mount the Temple Mount? He's like, well, it doesn't matter. I was like, when Jesus went up, where did he go? So, well, it doesn't matter. It's not that, it's what's important is, and he just would not. I pushed him. And it was clear that he just couldn't do it because it wouldn't do him any favors. Like, why do that? Why pick that fight? Right? Everybody makes risk reward calculations.
Sure.
Christians in the region make them in a direction that we often don't have to here.
And aren't they used intentionally as propaganda?
100%.
And they just don't. It's a risk reward calculation.
It is. And at some point, like you are, I mean, listen, if you're Palestinian, you've already crossed that line of like, I'm just gonna, protect my own first and like my community, and like then it's, you see what's happening in Gaza, and then you come out and it's like you're part of, like we all order our lives, in like priority, like order them, am I American first? I'm a Christian first. Mm-hmm. My ancestors are like French and English or whatever. Am I like, am I Christian, French, American, or am I French, American, Christian? Like, and so I think a guy like Munther he's actually Palestinian first, mm-hmm. and then he's Christian, right? That's the order in which he has chosen to align himself. And the thing is, like, I know pastors over there who have done the opposite, who identify as Christian first, and they face, good bit of persecution, but I won't name them so that nobody hurts them. They're good people. And if, they're just doing the work on the ground of the gospel, right? Helping the poor, taking care of their members, just trying to hold it together, right? And they're not out, giving statements to the International Court of Justice how to stick it to the Jews, right? Mm. Like, they're not doing that. Mm. They're just doing the work of the gospel. And if at that point, really, I don't care what you think about Israel and the Jewish people, because you're doing the hard work of the gospel, right? But if you, like, the reason that I feel fine to go after Munther is because not only do I know him, and we've had lots of these conversations face to face, and we've had fun ones, but like he has chosen how he orders himself, and he has chosen to order himself as a Palestinian first, and allow himself to be used by the Muslims and by Hamas specifically to make their case to the world. And he's been doing it aggressively, and he's on, he was on Peace Now's page, and now he's speaking to Tucker. And I had a friend who messaged me. It's like, well, that horseshoe theory really was working right now.
That's funny. Well, that's actually, though, I mean, I think you can, that's a version of the explanation that makes so much sense, because you can see how in somebody's mind they would order those priorities with the kind of what they see as a virtuous goal of protecting their community, protecting this ancient community, this, in the case of Porphyrius, this beautiful church, et cetera. Yes. That's super interesting.
No, and it is, listen, I feel terrible for the plight of the Palestinians. It really does. It is really hard for them. And it got a lot harder after October 7th. And they are in a difficult spot. They're in a bind, right? And like I said, a bunch of them have chosen to leave, but the ones that have chosen to stick around, there are some that are like, we're going to, we feel like we're called to be here and called to remain and be faithful. And then there are, there's Christians who are like, one of the weird thing is that there are Christians who self-identify as Christians because of the familial background of, like, my family's been Christians for 1,000 years, right? Like, that's our people. We're part of the Christian people, but they're atheists. I was getting my hair cut in Nazareth one time, and I asked.
Great way to start a story.
I know. And I asked the barber, I said, are you Christian or Muslim? He goes, I'm Christian. I said, well, what church do you go to? He said, I don't go to church. I'm an atheist. And I think it's really hard for Americans to consider, because for us, the Christian label is a matter of faith, whereas in a lot of places, in particularly the Middle East, like, religion's a part of identity. It's part of, like, the fertility rate in Iran is super low. It's it's like, it puts it on par with like Club Med, which is one of the lowest in Europe. And one of the factors is that secular people don't have babies, which is true. There's lots of statistics and data backing that up. Which means that you have all these people who are outwardly religious, meaning the women wearing the hijab, they'll do Ramadan, they'll do all the stuff. But they're not into it.
Customs, right?
They're just going through the motions, but they're essentially atheists or just not. They're nuns. They're like the nuns of the region. And they're just not embracing it, and so. You have a lot of that also there in Israel and the Palestinian territories. It's just not so cut and dry. And I think we look at it from over here and go, as Tucker did, man, if you're supporting the country that's blowing up churches and killing Christians, you've lost the message. Yeah, I would agree to that. I would agree that if that's what's happening, but that's not what's happening. It's like it's much more complicated, like holistic and tribal, right. And it's very different than it is here in the United States. But at the same time, it's also, I don't think it's hard I think it shouldn't be hard for Christians to actually take a stand and say, who's really causing the problems to the Christian community in the region? It's not the Jews.
Macro perspective, it is clearly not the Jews, right?
Right? And
you'd rather live in Israel than Iran.
Exactly. And there's a saying among the Islamists, first the Saturday people, then the Sunday people. I was standing on a bridge in northern Iraq, what year that was, a long time ago. And I was talking to an older Iraqi gentleman who said he remembers playing with Jews when he was young. And he said to us, and this was, a city emptied of Christians because of ISIS. He said, I wish I knew then what I know now. Mm-hmm. Meaning, I wish I knew that they were coming for us next, because we would maybe prepare differently. Taken things, had different calculations. The fact is that here in the United States, when the pro-Hamas rally started, in October it was it's the Israel and the Jews and whatever, but they literally protested the Rockefeller Christmas tree lighting.
Yeah, they did.
In Dallas there was a Christmas tree lighting in a mall. And the Palestinian or the Hamas activists stopped that. Gavin Newsom canceled the Christmas tree lighting in California. It said it was because of threats. It probably just because he didn't want to do it. It's busy that night. At dinner or something. Yeah,
but French Laundry.
French Laundry was calling. He had the reservation. Just couldn't get out of it. Put it a long time.
You don't want to give that up. No.
It takes a long time to get one of those, right? But it's still there was this clear shift between. It's not just about the Jews, and to me, it's the root of anti-Semitism, the root of this irrational Jew hatred, is that the Jews were the people by which God brought his moral revelation into this world, and the world hates him for it. We know things like all people are made in the image of God because of the book that the Jews gave to the world, and that the Christians then picked up and spread all over the place, right?
Which is inconvenient, by the way, to us as human beings, right. Sinful human beings. Right.
And we don't want that. The New Testament talks about the love of darkness, right? We don't want to be exposed. And we actually like to, hate each other.
Gotta eat the apple. Yeah.
Right. And so when we're told to love one another, when we're told to not hate each other, we're told to live right by people, that comes out of that book. And if you don't want that, then you're gonna there's a lot of people been talking to me over the last couple of weeks about this unity of what they're calling the red and the green, right? Like the Marxist, communist, and the Islamists lining up together. They wouldn't be friends in other places, are united in shutting down, bridges and airports. I mean, it's like
Asr Namani wrote a book on that, right?
Yeah, and that's to me the moment we're in, and it makes it civilizational. And what makes it so frustrating to me that of all the people that Tucker could have interviewed in, Israel, Palestinian territory, or it's like, okay, you did the Palestinian territories, but he asked them about Israel, and Munther doesn't know anything about it, Christians in Israel, because he's not there, right? And instead he interviews a Christian in Israel, and they'll give you a different story. You got to hear all the sides, but that's not what he did. And plus, at the same time, the real core problem is this unifying of the red and the green against civilization, against the people who affirm the Bible. That's what the fight is here. And either we can be like uniting to be people like we're the people who are united and believe that the Bible is a blueprint for human flourishing, come together to say, hey, this is like civilization comes, like we're rooted in this book. We know things like civil disobedience is we understand civil disobedience is a good thing because of that. If it wasn't for the Jews, we'd never have embraced that, right? Because you have stories like the midwives in the time of Moses, the beginning of the book of Exodus, or the Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fiery furnace, right? Like
the VeggieTales rendering of that is indelible, by the way.
I have no doubt. And you have those where God affirms civil disobedience. That doesn't happen in any other like cultural institution out there. Things like the difference, but the difference between nations and empire, right? Like God affirms nations all through the Bible. God never affirms empire, right? Like he actually gives the boundaries to Israel, and Moses, here shall your boundaries be, right? Because you're a nation, limiting. Whereas the empires is just like ever growing. So there's never the affirmation of empires, always the affirmation of nations. That difference comes out of the Hebrew Bible. The New Testament is about interpersonal relationships. It's about husbands love your wives, and fathers don't exasperate your children, and like these relationships, be like love one, be kind, like this kind of interpersonal relationships is essential. Like much of the New Testament is kind of talking about that kind of thing, whereas the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, is about like nation building. Mm-hmm. How do you build a community and live together in peace? And there's this great picture in the book of Isaiah, second chapter, where like basically the nations come up to Jerusalem. They learn of the God of Jacob, right? They learn of the law. And then God will judge between peoples. And then they will turn their swords into plowshares and the spears into pruning hooks. To me, it's a progression of you learn of this book of human flourishing. And if you adopt it, it brings peace. It brings the peace that you're after. But we live in a world where people don't want to read that book anymore. And yet they want peace. Like my daughter's, she's graduating now from high school, but all through her public education, every gymnasium and cafeteria had written on the walls, kindness counts, don't bully, be nice.
Right.
All of these are very biblical concepts.
It was Tom Holland and Dominion and
of its roots.
Right.
And Os Guinness, the public theologian, has this great idea. It's like he says, like we're a cut flower generation, right? It's like this. we're like cut flowers in a vase. We've been separated from our roots, and we're struggling to understand why we're falling apart, because we're like, we got all the pretty parts, well, we did, and then COVID didn't help, and and then the conflicts, and we're withering flowers, right? The water's getting a little dirty and stinky, and it's we gotta get back to that. To me, we gotta get back to the root, and it's understanding. Like I would say it's almost landed. That's why to me that's so valuable for Christians to visit Jerusalem, like to go to this place and stand in it and recognize that God chose a place and a people on this earth to make that known to the world.
Yeah,
and maybe they still matter. I'm banking on that they do.
I love the metaphor of the flowers in the vase, because another part of that is you're just sort of floating.
Yeah.
Right? You're not tethered to a root. You're floating in the water, and you don't even know where you are.
Right.
A lot of my friends on the left have these caricatures of why Christians care about Israel. And these are caricatures that you're very familiar with, and I'm sure you confront all the time. I imagine, they would listen to what you said about how Christians are less landed, and say, what do you mean? I hear these like wild end times pastors that are at the forefront of this Christian nationalism rising movement that Donald Trump is going to usher into the White House and, rebuild the temple and all that. In your interactions with Israel, the country, the government, at Philos, which I imagine you have great relationships with a lot of people in Israel, is that ever an issue? Is that, if you were responding to somebody on the left, does that define the Christian approach to Israel?
No. I mean,
and you actually have a great piece in the Federalist about this from years ago that we dug up before we started recording.
No, it's so much of the assumption is, actually, I was, weeks ago with one of the famous Christian nationalists, and he's like, Luke, you must be, I'm not a dispensationalist, and like you, and I'm like, well, I'm not a dispensationalist either. And for those who don't know, dispensationalism is one of the premier end times visions where Israel is very key in that. Mm-hmm. But here's a weird thing, Emily, is that over the last several years, the third temple thing is becoming very popular, but not in the Christian world, in the Jewish world.
Right.
And I was like, I started getting, because I'm always curious. I think about what are the arguments that either people on the left or even Christians who don't support Israel, what is the arguments they're making? And I love to kind of go explore that kind of those issues on the ground, right? I love to have conversations with people I'm not supposed to have conversations with. In 2001, I spent 2 hours with the co-founder of Hamas on a rooftop in Ramallah. Yeah, I know, it's super weird.
What?
Yeah. He had gotten out of jail for a couple weeks before, and I landed a meeting with him, and it was fun.
It was fun.
Oh yeah, I mean, fun as in interesting and fun, and I like good conversations. I mean, anybody wants to.
He didn't throw you off the roof.
Did not. I'm here, and no, he was mind you, it was like a mob boss. So I was like, that's what it. That's the vibe. Very charismatic. You could see how he could draw people. I mean, it's leadership and charisma really matter, right? And you can see that. But one of the things I was curious about this third temple thing. And I was like, so I reached out to my tour operator and I said, I want to meet the guy who wants to build the third temple. Introduce me to that guy. And so they're like, okay, Luke. And so they bring me to this place called the Temple Mount Institute. And then we go in and we go around and it's all the parts. It's the showbread table and this and the lampstands and all the stuff. And I'm like, yeah, but why? Because these are all Jews who are doing this. And I was like, but make the case. And the person who was following, showing us around was, she was a 20-year-old girl and she was cool and all, but she couldn't explain to me make the case from the Jewish perspective. And so I get out, my tour operator, I said, listen, I want to meet the guy who makes the case for the third temple. I want to hear it. I want to hear the third. And so they set up a lunch for me. And I meet this guy. And actually, it was not just me, but I had my group with me. And so everybody's part of this. And he's telling me all about, it's his vision for it. And, you ask him like, well, what about there's a dome with a rock.
Right.
It's in the way.
Yes.
How's that going to work? Well, I just don't know. I don't know how it's going to but I just know that this is what, I'm supposed to be, working towards that. Okay. And I said, well, how did you get into this? And he goes, well, I was laying with my wife in bed, and my wife says to me, the Bible says we're supposed to have a temple. What are you doing about that? Ooh. And I was like, oh my gosh, how many wars have started in this world because some dude's wife next to him is like, you gonna take that? Right? Is Netanyahu's wife's laying next to him going like, what? Like Khomeini is gonna launch 300 rockets at you, and you got what? Nothing? Come on, man. Yeah. Right? Like, I guarantee there's a lot of international incidences because some dude's wife's laying next to him going, you can take that? Right. But the strange thing is, it's become it's a very big thing amongst a certain sector of Jews.
And I feel like that was catalyzed by the moving of the embassy, the sort of Trump administration moving the embassy. You're shaking your head no. No, it was before then, actually. There has been for a while a rising kind of, it's called a messianic movement within Judaism, and that we're in the age of Mashiach, of the Messiah. And I don't think it's not like the Christians aren't driving this. It's if anything, it's the other way around. The Jews are coming to the Christians and saying, wait, can you help us with this kind of thing? And a bunch of Christians are like, yeah, okay, that sounds fun, But it's not definitive of the Christian community.
It's not. Actually, right. I would say the majority of Christians in America, actually the majority of the Christians in the world, don't think there's anything special about Israel and the Jewish people and God's redemptive plan. I would say it's probably a 60-40 split. Maybe it's 65-35, but it's in the direction of, it's just, Israel is to the Jews as Fiji is to the Fijians and French is to France. Right. Right?
Yeah.
It's just part of, it's the people, it's where they are, but it's not that, there's nothing special in God's plan. Right? God moved on.
We would, as Americans, want to protect the Washington Monument. We would want to protect.
This is our stuff, right?
Yeah, we'd want Gethsemane. We want to protect these things, but
it's not.
We don't need them to practice.
Right. Yeah. Right. They're not necessarily theologically significant any longer. That's a huge group of American Christians. I would say it's the majority, much to the consternation of my Christian Zionist friends. I do think they actually are the majority. All that, that's the Catholics. The Catholics don't think there's anything special necessarily, and
right.
The Missouri Synod doesn't think so.
Right.
Actually, the Lutherans in general don't think so. The Baptists are split in half. The non-denoms are split in half. So you don't get this, it's not coming from this place of there's this deep well of plans, and I actually was talking to a friend of mine about doing a podcast series called The Rise and Fall of Mars Hill. No, sorry, he did that. The Rise and Fall of the Left Behind series.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Right? Because that was huge for a whole group of a generation.
Definitely my generation,
yeah. Your generation, right? I read them all too. And, I remember sitting with a pastor who said that, the best and worst thing that ever happened to dispensationalism was the Left Behind series. Because, everybody's like, I'm dispensational. And then they read the books and they're like, oh, I'm not dispensational. Right? It was a huge swing. And actually, I was talking to recently a worship guy, and he was like, and I was telling him that, and he goes, "Oh, well, it actually would be called the Rise and Fall and Rise Again of Left Behind." I was like, "What do you mean?" And he said, "Well, actually, the most popular worship songs that are coming, that are like growing in popularity, all come out of the Book of Revelation." I'm like, "Oh, that's interesting." So I don't know, Emily. I don't. Like, the people project on me that like the reason that I'm in this is
Right.
because I have some grand end times plan. I don't.
Yeah.
I don't. I mean, like, I actually don't think about it all that much. I am in this because I do think that there is something special that the Jews have to play in this unfolding of God's plan. And I think that the fact that Jews are going back to the land from the north to south, to east and west, back to the land that was promised to them as an everlasting covenant. When I hear everlasting, I understand it to be everlasting, because that's what the word means,
Sure.
right? And so I'm in this because I think there's something special there. The whole New Testament is written by Jews. And so maybe I should try and think about, what did this mean for them, right? Because I'm a Gentile, I'm not Jewish, and I got grafted into this story, but it's really their story, and I get to be a part of it, which is cool, but it's not my story, and I'm excited to see how it unfolds, and I see this really strong connection between, wow, this, like, the world really hates the Jews, and that's really weird. And then they hate the Christians too. Wonder, oh, maybe it's because we got the same book, right? And then, there's, Paul talks about in Romans that we're grafted in, like we're grafted into this story. He says in Romans, I think 9, that the root sustains you, you don't sustain the root. Yeah. And he's talking to the Gentiles there. And he thought the root being this like story of the Jewish, of the patriarchs, the story of like
the covenant,
the covenants, and I'm like, oh, well, maybe because like we're grafted into the blessings, maybe we're also grafted into the curses, which means this hatred that follows the Jews everywhere they go. And there is a point, and then we hated them also for like 2,000 years, so that didn't help. But we're in this moment now. And my hope is that, Christians will take a moment, take a step back and go, maybe there's something going on here. I don't know how it unfolds. I find it fascinating, and I'm into having a good conversation over a beer, but I'm not, like, it's not the motivating factor. But it is for some, and I don't slight them for it. And I also don't, all my friends who don't think there's anything special, I don't think that is by nature anti-Semitic. And this will get me in trouble.
Sure. No, that's fair.
But because I don't think saying that the Jews are not special is anti-Semitic, right? I think that actually the point in which it makes it anti-Semitic is to say they're extra bad.
Right. There's something especially bad.
Right. And they are the problem of the world. That is where you get anti-Semitism. To say that there's nothing actually special about them, to me, is not that actually. I don't think that's particularly anti-Semitic.
Yeah.
But I also think that I do think there's something special about them. And I think there's something special that God still has a plan for them. That's my starting point. That's kind of, I don't want to say it's my ending point, but it's why I do this. I totally didn't expect. So I don't think I knew any Jews until 2011. So that's
a long time, Luke.
I know it's a long time for youngins like you, but for me, it was like I had a life before then, and I think it's, I fell into this. I always thought people, like, when I looked at people who were like really, zealous for Israel and the Jews, like, oh man, those are weird people. Here I am. Freaking weirdo over here, loving on them Jews.
Well, this is a great place to ask the last question I wanted to ask. I know that at Philos, you guys have done stuff with Nagorno-Karabakh. I know you've done stuff in Iraq. I know you've done stuff basically everywhere. Yeah. And I just wanted to, before I let you go, Luke, get you to tell us a little bit about what Philos does and what you see as the stakes for Christians in the Middle East and Northern Africa and all of those places that you guys are working.
Yeah, I mean, our tagline is we promote positive Christian engagement in the Near East, and we define the Near East. If you draw a 900-mile radius out from Jerusalem, that puts you in the lands of the Bible, right? And we started this thing called Save Armenia to basically raise awareness about the problem that was going on with Turkey and Azerbaijan squeezing out the Armenians, because that's a big issue. And Noah's Ark was where it landed was in Armenia, and then it was taken over by Turkey, but it's still in the ethnic Armenian area. And here's this first, one of these first Christian nations in the world, and they're just being squeezed by in the same way that the Christians throughout the region are being squeezed. And so we started, when we started, we were raising awareness about Christian persecution all over the region. ISIS was rising, and the Christian communities were being decimated.
It was 2014.
Yeah, 2014. Yeah. And it's weird how the same thing is happening again, except the Islamists are still strong, and they've changed their, it's not ISIS anymore, it's Hamas or Hezbollah. I mean, there was a Christian in Lebanon that was a major Christian figure. He was killed last week, and the head of the Maronite Church in Lebanon, for perhaps one of the first time I'm aware of, actually came out against Hezbollah and said, "Hey, watch it. We got guns too, guys." I mean, he didn't say that. That's me. Right. That's me adding to it. But it's the Philos means friend in Greek, and our argument is that there are friends in the region. There are Christians. There are actually good Muslims who aren't looking to kill Jews. I mean, in the UAE and Bahrain and those countries that have chosen to normalize with Israel, right? What if Israel was the model of the region instead of the problem of the region, right? And what's the model? It's you have religious liberty, you have freedom, you have a robust media, you have the freedoms that we want to have here, and even if that doesn't happen, the Jews aren't going away, and there's something going on with God in them that I think is real, and and our roots are over there. It's these churches are ancient, and I still think that they have a special place to play in what God's doing in this world, and so we're very much about trying to just muck about. We also have some programming to engage the Spanish-speaking world and the African Americans. We have a Philos Catholic. We have stuff that we do related to fighting anti-Semitism here in the United States. But it's really about let's get back to our roots, because you get back to your roots, maybe we'll find the path out of this malaise that we're in. Mm-hmm. This the flowers wilting, and maybe we should change the water or put in the ground or something different than what we're doing. And so, my hope is for peace in the Middle East. I want that. But I know it's going to be one step at a time. And because I'm a Christian, I believe you got to lean into hope, because I've seen too many things that in my life to be hopeless. So,
amen. Luke Moon, Executive Director at Philos Project. Thank you so much. This has been fascinating.
It's fun.
You've been listening to another edition of the Federalist Radio Hour. I'm Emily Jashinsky, culture editor here at The Federalist. We'll be back soon with more. Until then, be lovers of freedom and anxious for the fray.